The vision we have of what will likely occur if the United States goes through hyperinflation is not realistic. In a country that's actually experiencing hyperinflation right now, nobody really wants gold because they can't sell it because there's no banking system. And this is almost impossible for someone in the West to really get their head around.
The Chinese are buying gold, central banks are buying gold.
They're buying gold because of what we did in freezing the assets of Russia. I don't know that they're worried about the dollar. In fact, I don't think they are. I think they're far more worried about getting their assets frozen by the United States government. If your only objective was to maintain your purchasing power for the next 100 years, I would be 100% in gold. People like yourself are waking up enough average citizens to where they realize they have to be more self-sufficient and they can trade amongst one another. When the stuff hits the fan and I need to trade this silver coin, I don't need to rely on the general public that might not want it, because I know darn well that Kiyosaki will buy it from me, or you might buy it from me. And the government creates all of these economic distortions. It creates all these perverse incentives within the real economy. It's absolutely insane. We should have an economic depression. If we took the medicine, we would have an economic depression that would look very similar to the 1930s.
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Today on the channel, I have a very special guest, George Gammon. He has a popular YouTube financial channel called The Rebel Capitalist, as well as he has one that's self-titled, I do believe. Great channels that I've been watching for a few years. One of the first videos I watched of yours was where you were explaining the concept of a market melt-up. And to people who aren't that well versed in economics like myself, that was very helpful in terms of understanding that concept. I'm going to ask you today if you think we're possibly going to see something like that. But your channel features daily commentary on current events, interviews, macroeconomics analysis, finance, entrepreneurship. And there is an event coming up that you're going to be hosting that we'll talk about in a few here. But how are you doing today, man? And welcome to the channel.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm doing extremely well. Love the channel. You guys are doing a great job. So it's really an honor to be on.
So right now we're seeing these markets at record highs, but we're also seeing a lot of cash on the sidelines, apparently. You recently touched on Berkshire Hathaway's cash holdings, which I believe are at record highs, 200 billion. And I have to presume that, seeing as the Oracle of Omaha, as he's called, is somebody that is watched and followed and tracked, that many people are also on the sidelines with a lot of cash as well. So if there's so much cash on the sidelines, how are the markets so high? Or is this really a melt-up situation that we're seeing here?
So I would argue a lot of the reason we're seeing this melt up, if you will, it's foreigners buying U.S. assets. So let's kind of zoom out a little bit and look at global macro. So right now, the Japanese yen is plummeting against the United States dollar. It's getting to the point where the Japanese central planners have had to come in and intervene in the market because of the rate of decline. So if you're a Japanese average Joe Jane, if you're a Japanese pension fund, if you're a Japanese hedge fund investor, et cetera, and all your expenses are denominated in yen, right? And you've got the yen just crashing against the dollar, it is extremely prudent to buy US dollar denominated assets, right? So just for a moment, imagine that if you're a US citizen, and I think it would be the same thing for Canadians. I don't know what the Canadian dollar has done relative to the US dollar, but my guess is that over the last probably 12 years or so, that it's gone down pretty substantially. In other words, the dollar has appreciated quite a bit. And if you compare the dollar appreciation relative to the increase of goods and services, the dollar has appreciated more than the decline in value with the Canadian dollar relative to the stuff people buy every day.
So you're pretty heavy on cash right now. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your experiences in Argentina. I think you had a controversial tweet recently that has caused people to scratch their heads a little bit about the dollar paradox with respect to people using dollars instead of gold. I understand this. Most people understand what you mean, but it could be misconstrued as a cheerleading for the dollar over gold. Maybe you could just explain a little bit about your experiences in Argentina and what that taught you about what people will do in times of crisis, what sort of currency they're going to gravitate to. And again, yeah, if you could elaborate on why you have this position that you have right now.
Okay, so going to Argentina, just for your viewers, what I did is I drove from Santiago, Chile, over to Buenos Aires to meet up with my good friend Doug Casey. And it took about a week, and I made several stops. So I basically drove across Argentina. I stopped in Mendoza, Cordoba, Rosario, a couple other places overnight, and then we ended up in BA with Doug. And the objective for the trip was to make the whole cross Argentina drive using nothing but Bitcoin, gold, and silver. And so one of the things I wanted to try to experience in real life, just so I could give some advice to my viewers as to how they could prepare for a CBDC, is how you could transact completely outside of the system, right? Because regardless of what you think about the dollar or the fiat currency or gold, when we get a CBDC, and I think it's a matter of when, not if, cash is going to be a vital tool for you to operate as a medium of exchange. And then the Argentina trip really proved that. If your goal is to transact outside of the system, so if you want to buy extra diesel this month, you're not restricted by the central planners. If you want to buy extra beef, if you want to buy prepping equipment, I'm sure they're going to frown on that. That's definitely going to impact your social score, because heaven forbid, people are self-sufficient, because we want everyone completely dependent upon the government. So that was what the problem that I'm trying to solve. So what I thought initially is the difficulty or the challenge would be finding places to exchange gold or gold dealers. And I thought it would be very easy to actually exchange the Bitcoin, because I thought what would happen is I could find like a Bitcoin cafe, and there'd be several like kind of digital nomads there, younger guys, the demographic.
And the cyberpunk hoodies, hacker types or something.
Exactly. Just working on their blog or working whatever they're doing online, earning money and just kind of living that digital nomad lifestyle. I thought I would see a lot of these people at these Bitcoin cafes, and I could just go up to them and say, hey, I'll trade you some Bitcoin if you want to give me some of these Argentinian pesos that are in the process of losing 20% per month as far as a person. We've got a hyperinflating currency, let's not forget.
Yeah.
And what was interesting is nothing could have been further from the truth. So when I tried, the first town that we stopped in was Mendoza. And we tried to go to some of these cafes that were on the map. And first of all, none of the cafes that were on the map, none of the places on the map, period, actually accepted Bitcoin. None of them. And even though some of them did have the Bitcoin sticker on the window. And then when we looked around at the people in there, like it wasn't what you expect. It's not like a Starbucks when everyone's in there like working on their computer, or even like a cafe here in Medellin where I am. It was more just like a normal coffee shop where there's just people that aren't really working, just kind of interacting and socializing. So this was just a complete dead end. So what we ended up doing was going down to some of the gold dealers and trying to get cash, because the bottom line is the vision of what we have, or the vision we have of what will likely occur if the United States or Canada or any place goes through hyperinflation is not realistic. So what we think is that we'll just have to barter our gold coins, or we'll have to barter silver or something like that. And if you have gold, if you have silver, then everyone is going to be lining up at your front door, just willing to give you absolutely anything you want as far as goods and services.
If they are, they're going to have guns.
Yeah. But so what we found is that in a country that's actually experiencing hyperinflation right now, Nobody really wants gold. And silver was definitely the winner. Silver was the winner by far.
Okay.
And when I mean nobody wants it, I mean it was very difficult to sell. And even with the gold dealers and even with what they call the cambios, and those are the guys that exchange Argentinian pesos for dollars or vice versa, and they take a huge spread. But the only way we could sell the gold with the few people that we found that would actually buy it is if we took a huge haircut. And at the time, spot was about 2,200, and the most we could get was about 1,000.
Wow.
So we had to take more than a 50% haircut on that. Now the silver we were able to sell at pretty much spot. So we had the 1 ounce, I believe, maple leaves. They're from Canada.
What could that buy you in Argentina? $27.
More than it'd buy you in Canada, but it's not. It's only going to last you like a day at the most. And we were having to pay for our hotel and our gas and everything. So when I sold I had to sell like 10 of these at one time just to give us enough money just for like a couple days. And then this was the gold coin, this 10th of an ounce, and they just didn't want anything to do with it. And then with the Bitcoin, that was even worse. We couldn't find anyone that would buy that from us. And we actually found a text. It was totally random. It wasn't on the map, but we got so desperate at one point, we were just going from like store to store saying, hey, would you buy Bitcoin from us? And so we started targeting some of the tech shops that were selling like iPhones. And we figured these guys are probably fit that demographic a little bit better. Yeah. We actually found one guy that's like, yeah, I don't want to buy Bitcoin, but if you have Tether, I'll buy Tether from you. So we were able to sell some of the Bitcoin that we had for Tether and then sell that guy Tether. And then he gave us the Argentinian pesos, or the equivalent in Argentinian pesos. And what everyone wanted down there was just dollars. But what was interesting is they didn't just want dollars, they wanted $100 bills. So if you had a $100 bill, you'd actually get a much better exchange rate than if you had a $20 bill.
And why was that?
I think there's just, they can collect more in a smaller space, more purchasing power in a smaller space. And a lot of this is just black market. You got to understand that. So
is it harder to counterfeit 100, or?
I don't know that it's about counterfeiting. I think it was more about the amount of purchasing power that you could keep in a very small space. And again, this is black market stuff. So the vibe that I got was a lot of people that are doing this currency exchange were probably, your drug dealer, your gangster, your mobster type. Those are the guys that you're dealing. And I'm not saying that these guys did us any harm or anything like that. They're great to work with. Yeah. But that's kind of the clientele. So usually those guys prefer to have dollars. And the cambios that were doing this just kind of as a side hustle that weren't, in that first category, what they were doing is they would give you, let's say, 900 pesos for every $1. But let's say the going rate at the bank was like 850. So you'd get a much better exchange rate. But on the actual black market that these guys had access to, you could sell it for that dollar, let's say for 1,200 or 1,300 or something like that. So they were acting as a middleman and then just kind of pocketing the spread. And another main takeaway that we had that's kind of eye-opening is how entrenched the, I guess, bureaucracy is when the government or the country goes through such an extreme scenario as hyperinflation. So what as an example, what I'm saying is that one guy in particular that owned that tech shop that was doing this as a side hustle. I asked him what he thought of Milei. And, since Milei has been in office, he's really brought down the rate of inflation. So you would think for the average person, they would say, well, I might not like his politics or whatever, but he's doing a great job on inflation. That's for sure. And this guy said, oh, I hate him. And I said, really? Why do you hate Milei? And he goes, because this is my business. And if Milei brings down inflation, if Milei solves all the problems, then I'm out of job. Yeah. I no longer have a side hustle. So you see, when the government creates all of these economic distortions, it creates all these perverse incentives within the real economy for people to keep the distortions not only intact, but if anything, increasing the amount of distortions so they can pocket more and more money, even at the detriment to the overall economy. And so we made it across just barely. We were very thin there for a while. But the reason most people want dollars as opposed to gold, silver, Bitcoin is because they can't sell it because there's no banking system. And this is almost impossible for someone in the West to really get their head around, because a lot of the comments I got on Twitter, as an example, were, well, if this Argentinian would have, or if you would have just put your entire net worth into gold 5 years ago, then you'd be good to go. And that's not true, because you have to ask yourself, if you're in Argentina, who's going to be your buyer, right? Because you got to think of a system where you cannot use a bank. Because right now, if you have money in a bank, it's locked. You can only get out $40 a day, maximum $40 a day. And so what you're trying to do, let's just say that you sell your gold bars for $50,000. Well, then that money goes into a bank and you can't get it out. And it's depreciating at 20% per month. And you can only get out $40 a day. So there's no way that you're going to sell that gold unless you can get someone to give you dollars. And no one's going to give you dollars because they're hoarding it for themselves. So then the only way that the transaction would occur at a large level is if they give you cash Argentinian pesos, because it's outside the banking system. But nobody's going to take that many pesos because it's depreciating in value so quickly that you'd have to immediately spend that $50,000, let's say. So you get this crazy environment where nothing is liquid. You can't sell a house. You can't sell a car. You can't sell Bitcoin. You can't sell gold. You can't sell silver, because the only thing that's liquid is actually cash itself. So we're doing another road trip, the exact same thing, through Turkey here in a couple months. And I'm actually far more optimistic about Turkey because they have a functioning banking system. But the irony there is that in order to have liquidity for these things that we see as safe haven assets, you actually need a functioning system that we're all trying to transact outside of. It's very ironic.
Well, I mean, maybe one criticism of extrapolating that to other countries, namely the United States, North America, Western countries, would be that, okay, so while the United States dollar is still the cleanest shirt in the dirty laundry basket, what you're saying holds true. But what happens when there is no dollar, for example, which, you know, who knows when that's going to happen? I mean, now they're going to continue to leech off the euro and the people abandoning the yen for some time, probably. But I think a lot of Mad Max enthusiasts like myself who are getting ready to take their gold to Bartertown when the shit hits the fan are thinking, well, there's not going to be any dollars, so people aren't going to have that option. Do you think that there's some technicality here as to why gold was not preferred and why silver was preferred? Because it really is an interesting case study that you're proposing. I just think that would the same thing, you know, obviously the same is not going to be true when there's no dollar, right? Like when there is no other substitute, what do people go to then?
Well, let's think that through. First of all, we could talk about the fundamental structure of the dollar and how the probability of that happening is incredibly low. But let's just assume for a moment that's what happens. So you've got your gold, you've got your silver, the Canadian dollar and the United States dollar has been hyperinflated to infinity. So no one will take it for anything. So then what happens? Well, you don't have a medium of exchange, because people right now like to think of gold as money or silver as money. It's not. It's absolutely not. It's a store of value, and it's a fantastic store of value. And it's probably the best store of value that we have right now, especially when you look at the last 5,000 years. But it's not money, because to be money, you would have to have it as a medium of exchange. And I can assure you that nobody at a hotel, at a McDonald's, at a gas station is accepting silver coins. They're not accepting gold coins. You say, oh, George, we'll just wait till hyperinflation. I did. I went to hyperinflation, and nobody's
But
in fact,
but
people much
when people
prefer the
say
hyperinflating currency.
when people say though that that's because the U.S. dollar was there as a substitute.
No. Let me be clear. Even if you had no dollars there, the medium of exchange is still the Argentinian peso, even though it's losing 20% per month. So if I go down to the local gas station or restaurant or hotel or whatever it was, and I have a stack of Argentinian pesos, which you needed pretty much just for lunch, they'll take that all day long. In fact, they prefer that as opposed to you paying with a card that actually goes into their bank account. Now, if they have an offshore bank account, then they're good to go. It's a different story, right? But they will gladly accept that stack of Argentinian pesos. But if you say, hey, do you want this gold coin? Hey, do you want the exact same amount in silver? They'll look at you like you've got two heads.
But could that not just be how things are right? I mean, we see how quickly things can change. I think about the pandemic. One minute everybody is saying that masks don't work, and the next minute they're saying, you got to wear a mask or you're going to jail. Like, don't you think it's going to reach a certain point in which wheelbarrows full of cash are just viewed as impractical, and somebody has the bright idea of, hey, this silver coin is starting to look like a more viable substitute? Don't you think there's a breaking point with that? Stacks of cash.
I mean, look, watch my videos. I'm not taking wheelbarrows, but I'm taking it. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely insane. I mean, you go down there just to pay for lunch, and you have to pay for lunch, and they have a cash counter. Like, you ever gone to a bank and you have a big stack of cash and it goes like that? Every single business has one of those. You go to a coffee shop and they have one. So I don't know how it could get any worse than it actually is. And people still don't want silver or gold as a medium of exchange, And the difficulty for Argentinians, and we can go through this thought experiment, is that gold and silver aren't even really a store of value for them. Now, for them, because it has no liquidity. They cannot turn that gold into purchasing power. So if you had all your gold in Canada, let's say, but let's just assume for a moment that you couldn't sell it, because at the end of the day, you don't want gold. You don't want silver. Nobody does. What you want is the goods and services that it can buy you. You see? Sure. But if you can never, ever exchange that gold for goods and services, then it doesn't do you any good. And the reason you can't exchange it down there for goods and services is because they don't have a functioning banking system. That changes everything.
But gold, when it originally came about, there was no functioning banking system. Like when gold first emerged as a means of exchange, there was no, and obviously there was a lot less people then, and a lot of crazy stuff was going on. But isn't there a situation in which you would obviously you'd have a collapse of the banking system, perhaps, and then people would have to trade outside of that in some capacity, and you don't. If gold emerged as a means of exchange at one point, how could that not happen again?
Well, it's not happening in Argentina. I can tell you that. So I don't know what the scenario would be to where you would go back to that system. And the crashing of the dollar, that doesn't really even apply, because even if there were no dollars there, it's still the exact same thing with the hyperinflating currency, that they're using that hyperinflating currency as the medium of exchange.
What is that currency backed by?
Nothing. It's the Argentinian peso. It's as fiat as you can possibly get.
So it derives its value from its value in U.S. dollars. But where do U.S. dollars derive their value?
I don't know that it does derive its value from U.S. dollars. Let's assume there were no dollars at all. It's still just the local fiat currency. It's just it's a unit of account. It's a medium of exchange. And even though that medium of exchange is depreciating massively, it's still far more convenient than trying to shave off gold pieces or trying to figure out what type of change you can get if you have a 1 ounce silver coin and you're trying to buy something that's only $1, right? How do you figure out the change? This is a logistical nightmare, whether people like it or not. And it's just the cost benefit analysis. It's just far easier to use a hyperinflating fiat currency as a medium of exchange than it is silver or gold, etc.
So I think the fantasy in which people are imagining using gold and silver is one in which you have a totally collapsed system. I think that is the idea, right? So you have 10% gold. The Chinese are buying gold. Central banks are buying gold. It seems as though some countries, maybe I don't know if you call them BRICS countries. Not all of them are BRICS countries, but many countries are hoarding gold. So why do you think this is? Is everybody just got it wrong, or is Argentina an exception to the rule? I mean, you're going to go and do another case study in Turkey, and I'm interested to see the results of that.
I'm far more optimistic about Turkey as far as the liquidity for gold, silver, and Bitcoin, because they have that functioning banking system.
And they are more Eastern as well. So maybe there's another, maybe that cultural aspect might change things a bit too.
Yeah. So going back to your question of the central banks, I mean, they're buying gold because of, what we did in freezing the assets of Russia. So, I mean, I don't know that they're worried about the dollar. In fact, I don't think they are. I think if you're Japan, you've got a massive dollar problem from the standpoint of the dollar going up, and it's a wrecking ball for your economy. So I don't think that they're worried about the dollar crashing. I think they're worried about the dollar crashing up. That's for sure. But with the gold, I think they're far more worried about getting their assets frozen by the United States government, and they just don't want that counterparty risk.
So you're 10% gold. That's on the record. So what do you do with that, and why only 10%? Or why, maybe not phrase it as why only, but if we just frame it as, why not less than that? Why not 2%? Why not 20? Why 10?
Well, I think it depends on what your objectives are. And so if your only objective was to maintain your purchasing power for the next 100 years, I would be 100% in gold. There's no doubt about that. But for me, I'd like to get a little bit more of a return, and over the next, let's say, 5 or 10 years. And with gold, it's very difficult to determine what moves the price. People say that it's inflation, but it's really not, because you can see it go up in the 1970s. But outside of that, sometimes we have higher rates of inflation and it's still going down. People talk about negative real rates. That's not really a consistent correlation. Geopolitical risk, maybe sometimes there's a little bit more of a correlation there. The bottom line is just gold over the long periods of time, over decades, it just is the best way to store your purchasing power. Now, what drives it from day to day or month to month, I have absolutely no idea. I think the central banks more recently are definitely putting in a bid there,
you think that's due to the seizure of Russian assets primarily?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
For sure. Absolutely. And so, will that continue? Probably, because I think we're going to go into a more bifurcated world. But unfortunately, with gold, you really don't want to sell it. You really don't want to exchange it for goods and services, because then you're going to have to pay capital gains tax. And let's just say that gold goes to 10,000 an ounce, but it only goes up in nominal terms. And then you have to sell it and you get taxed. Well, then you're actually not maintaining your purchasing power.
Right.
And so it's just, it's the insurance policy. It's the ultimate insurance policy. And that's why I always have gold and I buy at any price. So if I make an additional $100,000, I'm going to take 10,000 of that and I'm going to put it into gold, regardless of what I think is going to happen with the price over the next 6 months, the next year, or quite frankly, even the next 5 years, because I think that's the most prudent thing to do. Now, if I was 20 years old and let's say I was making $100,000 a year, because I got a good digital nomad gig or something, and I had my whole entire life in front of me, and I only have a portfolio of, let's just say, $20,000, I would probably have less gold, and I'd probably have more Bitcoin.
Well, let's just hope that the government collapses and they can't tax us for the capital movements. Here's
Well,
hoping.
yeah. I mean, at the
I
end of
think
the,
they'll just come back in some more harsher totalitarian form, unfortunately.
yeah, my best case scenario is that people like yourself are waking up enough average citizens to where they realize they have to be more self-sufficient and they can trade amongst one another using whatever it is they want to use. So
Mm-hmm.
right now, one of the reasons why Bitcoin isn't being used in some place like Argentina as a medium of exchange, because now Bitcoin is different than gold and silver because it's so divisible that you
Yeah.
can just take your QR code with your phone and just hold it up to the computer and bam, it just charges and you don't have to worry about change and anything like that. So that would be like the ultimate medium of exchange. But right now, what's happening outside of the system, but what's happening are if you're a business, almost all of your input costs are going to be in dollars. So for you to take that Bitcoin, you can do that, but you've got to immediately change it into Tether or something that's the equivalent of a dollar because you can't afford to take that FX risk because your margins are only, let's say, 5 or 10%. So you cannot price that item in Bitcoin itself. You can only price it in dollars or the local currency and then accept Bitcoin and exchange it. For most businesses, it's just there's not enough demand for it. So it's not realistic. And I saw that when I went to St. Martin over this past weekend, and everyone said they're accepting Bitcoin Cash, and none of them actually did. So that would be the ultimate. But unfortunately, we're not going to get to that point until you decrease the power of the dollar network. And we have to realize that whether we like it or not, the network effects of the United States dollar is by far the most powerful network we have ever seen in human history. There's just absolutely nothing to compare it to. So what we have to do if we want to unplug from that system is we have to start setting up economies that are relatively circular. So what that means is the 10 people that are in this economy produce all of the goods and services, or the majority of them, that are needed for everyone else, right? And then you can go ahead and transact in Bitcoin and you can price things in Bitcoin. And what the dollar price to Bitcoin is doing is totally irrelevant. You don't even care about that because none of your input costs are priced in the dollar. They're all priced in Bitcoin. You see? So people, then how do you make that scale? Well, let's just look at an Amish community. I think that's the best example. The more productive the Amish community can be. So let's just say they're raising cows and they're producing milk and cheese and all these things to such a great degree that they can sell it to the outside world because they've got more than enough for their own family or their friends and family. That's an example of them being productive. So what we have to do with these circular economies of like-minded people is we have to increase our productivity to a level that we can start trading with the outside world. And you get that to a point where the outside world wants to take your currency or whatever you are using as a medium of exchange. That's how the dollar became the global currency in the first place. It wasn't with Bretton Woods. It was prior to that in the 1920s when the United States economy, which at the time was a very circular economy, right? All the inputs were dollar bills. All the prices were in dollar bills. So when we grew and grew and grew and grew, all these other countries wanted to do business with us. So what they have to do, well, they have to hold dollars in reserves because they want to buy stuff from the United States and they want to sell stuff to the United States consumer. So we have to start at a very local level and then we have to expand and expand and expand. The problem with a lot of people is they just sit back and say, well, all I'm going to do is hold silver and gold and Bitcoin and all my problems are going to be solved. No, that's not the way to look at it. You've got to build community first and foremost, and you've got to produce. You've got to produce stuff. That's right. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, this silver coin doesn't mean anything. Nobody wants this silver coin. They just want the milk, eggs, the clothing, the housing that this can buy you. So you've got to start producing the stuff, and then you can use whatever medium of exchange you want.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great segue into a brief chat about prepping here, but I just want to add one more thing about the currency and why is it that central banks are buying gold if they're worried about they're seeing the Russian assets being seized? Isn't that a black mark on the dollar then? Isn't that people getting out of dollars? And doesn't that mean like we could see a cascading effect of that might create a chain reaction that, who knows, causes the dollar to say hyperinflate when all those dollars start coming back? You don't foresee a scenario like that?
Sure, but that means the dollar goes up, not down. So let me explain, because this is something that is extremely, extremely counterintuitive. And it's why on my channel, I just pound the table constantly on why people should understand the mechanics of the monetary system. So let's go through this example that the BRICS currency, or the BRICS countries, come up with their own currency. And they're like, you know what? We've been held hostage by the dollar for all these years. So we're going to start transacting. And Saudi Arabia is trading oil for the Russian ruble or the Chinese yuan or whatever gold-backed currency they come up with. And they're like, forget it. We're done with these stupid dollars. And then you look at the global balance sheets and you go, my gosh, there's $70 trillion outside of the United States. So what happens when all those dollars start flooding back into the United States? We're going to have this hyperinflation because all the demand for the dollars just evaporates, right? That's the argument. And it's very logical. But unfortunately, that's a fundamental misunderstanding as to how the monetary system works. So what we're doing there is we're looking at dollars as though they're just this coin. So if I had a stack of these coins and nobody wants them, their value is basically zero, right? But what happens with the dollar is that, and this is unique to the dollar, is that the majority of them, especially outside the United States, were lent into existence. You see, so if the dollar demand goes down, the supply goes down at the same rate. So you can't think about dollars as coins or green pieces of paper from a standpoint of when there's less demand, they just pile up. What happens with the dollar is when there's less demand, they quite literally disappear. They're gone. Because when I'm talking about them being lent into existence, so let's say that you go down to your local bank.
You're talking like electronically fractional reserve?
It's just they're not, when banks lend money, they're creating new money. They're not lending existing money. So that's another concept that people really don't understand. Banks don't lend money. They create new money when they lend. So when you go out and take out that mortgage, let's say for $500,000, that the bank does what? They just increase your checking account balance by $500,000. That money did not exist before. They're not fractionally reserve lending someone else's money or anything. That's brand new money that they just created. So then what happens? Let's say that you buy a house with that $500,000, and then let's just say a week later you sell something else, and you're like, you know what? I really don't want to pay this interest, so I'm going to go ahead and pay the bank back the $500,000 that I borrowed from them last week to buy that house. So then you pay the bank back the money. Well, when you pay them back, you're not giving them money. All you're doing is taking your account balance from 500,000 back down to zero. You see? So the money's gone. It doesn't exist anymore. So if by them lending that 500,000, they increased the overall money supply. But then when you paid the loan back, the money supply decreased right back down to zero. So if nobody wants dollars, what are they going to do with the dollars? Well, they have to pay back that liability. They have to pay back that loan that created the dollar to begin with. So if nobody wants dollars, they pay back all the dollar-denominated debt. And when they pay back the dollar-denominated debt, all the dollars disappear. There's none left.
Well, I think this conversation is over my pay grade. I'm sure that there's going to be all kinds of comments in the comment section. Why didn't you say this and that? He's wrong about this. But it's definitely something I'm going to have to think about, because you definitely raised some interesting points there. But so getting back to the prepping thing, because what you said there is very important. And I hope people really get that, is that it's not about the means of exchange, it's about what you're exchanging it for. And your buddy, Robert Kiyosaki, apparently he has a bug out location and, a plan, a getaway plan,
I know exactly where
as
it is.
guns,
Yeah.
gold, and a getaway plan, as Salente would
Yeah.
say.
And he says
Uh,
it's defensible.
it's
Robert always says,
defensible.
and it's defensible.
All right. Yeah. So do you have a plan? Are you a prepper, or would you call yourself in terms of that?
Absolutely. But where I start my preparation is with network and community. So let's go back to the Argentina story for a moment. If I would have been able to go there in advance and spend, let's say, 6 months and get to know people, boots on the ground, I guarantee you I would have been able to find the guy or gal in town that is willing to trade for gold or silver or Bitcoin, or at least buy it. And so I could get the currency, the medium of exchange, to actually survive. But I just didn't know anybody. And there are so few people doing it, you just can't find people out on the street, right? So if I would have had those contacts, if I would have had the relationships built to begin with, it would have been a completely different story. So the community, the relationship building, that's what people should prioritize. And that's exactly what I'm doing. And, that's one of the massive, huge fringe benefits that I've had from the YouTube channel. Is when I started it back in 2019, I didn't know anyone like yourself or Kiyosaki or Gerald Salente or Lynette Zhang. And now I know all these people, and I would consider most of them very, very good friends. So when the stuff hits the fan and I need to trade this silver coin, I don't need to rely on the general public that might not want it, because I know darn well that Kiyosaki will buy it from me, or you might buy it from me. So that's what I'm doing to prepare. Also, I'm in Medellin, Colombia, which I've spoken to my buddy Chris Martinson with Peaks Prosperity, and because he really gets into the nitty gritty here, and he says that this is a very good place with the exception of grain and protein.
He lives there too?
I'm sorry?
Does he live there as well?
No, he lives in the northeast of the United States.
Oh, okay.
But I asked him about Medellin. He's like, okay, from fruits, vegetables, water source, all these things, you're really, really good there as far as it being self-sufficient. But you've got to figure out an option to get protein. You've got to figure out an option to get grain. So what I'm doing right now is I'm actually looking at this community called Hygiene, which is about an hour and a half south of Medellin, because you can buy a little finca there, maybe 3 or 4 acres at a very, very cheap price. And it's just a little small town of maybe 1,000, maybe 2,000 people at the most. And all of them are farmers, all of them, every single one of them. So that's kind of what I'm doing. Also, I'm going to be eligible in a couple months for my Colombian citizenship. So that will be my second passport. And I think that if, the pandemic taught us anything, it's how important having a second passport actually is, because I had that US passport, which was supposed to be the best in the world. And at the time, nobody wanted to take me. I was in Colombia and I was trying to go to all these countries, and like, you got a US passport? No, I don't think so. So that was a real eye opener for me on how important that is. And then also having a bank account in another country. And there's a lot of these things that people can do right now that would dramatically improve their chances of being able to maintain their standard of living when the stuff actually hits the fan at whatever level, whether that's a complete collapse of society or just moving into an economy where they're using a CBDC.
And lastly, can you just give us your worst and best case for the next 6 months, say in terms of the overall economy? Are we going to see things go up? Or are we going to see things go down? I know it's always a difficult question because.
Well, that's pretty easy, actually. Yeah, the best case scenario is that we just are at the same point we're at right now. I don't think the purchasing power is going to get any better. I think, unfortunately, the inflation is going to be sticky. I don't know that we're going to reaccelerate in the United States because the money supply is actually declining right now. But that increases the probability of a deflationary bust like we saw in 2008. So best case scenario would be kind of just chugging along The economic environment looks very similar to what it looks like now. Worst case scenario would be GFC 2.0.
Great Financial Crisis 2.0. Is that going to
Yeah,
be recession or depression? Or is there a difference? What?
that would be, well, the funny saying is the recession is when your neighbor loses their job, and the depression is when you lose your job. So, uh, I'm going to go ahead and say recession.
Mm-hmm.
We should have an economic depression if we did what we needed. If we took the medicine, you look at it from an Austrian standpoint, which I definitely think we should do. We would have an economic depression that would look very similar to the 1930s. But the central planners are going to continue to distort the economy, I think, the same way that they did during 2020. So I don't know that we have an economic depression. I think that we probably have a recession that's followed by just epic amount of fiscal spending from the government that probably takes us into the next wave of consumer price inflation, but which also creates further bifurcations within the economy where you have more and more and more people that are just ridiculously wealthy, and then a higher percentage of the middle class that are moving down into the I want to call it the lower end of the economic ladder. And then a good portion of those people are flat out becoming homeless. I was having a conversation with my research assistant that's in Scottsdale right now. And I remember living in Scottsdale in 2005. And this is kind of the anecdotal evidence that I think really paints the picture of what the economy is like and how I think it's going to get worse. Back then, I would never see a Lamborghini. Ever, 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 ever. I mean, if you saw one per year, it would just completely blow your mind. But I also never saw homeless people. Now, fast forward to 2023, if you go down to Old Town Scottsdale, I mean, just for lunch, you're probably going to see 10 Lamborghinis.
Yeah.
But you're also going to see literally hundreds, if not thousands, of people pushing around shopping carts that look like drug-induced zombies.
Yeah.
That's the way the world has changed. That's the way the West has changed. And unfortunately, even though they might be able to prevent an economic depression, I think we get more of that outcome by them trying to continue to kick the can down the road, because they never solve the problem. They only make it worse by, even if they're able to paper over the problem, they create so many economic distortions that it makes it worse from the standpoint of the poor and middle class than if we would have had the economic depression to begin with.
Good stuff. I'd encourage people to go and check out some of your more recent videos where you talk about the potential for bank failures. That's something we didn't get into today. You also have an upcoming Rebel Capitalist live event. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, thank you for plugging that. I appreciate it. It's the annual conference that I do. And this year it's in Orlando. It's May 31st through June 2nd. A lot of the speakers I've had in the past, and maybe some that we'll have this year, I'm sure you've probably interviewed guys like Kiyosaki. Who else is going to be? Mark Moss. I don't know if you've talked to my good buddy Mark on the show.
I know of Mark Moss, yes. What about Lynette Zhang?
Lynette's not going to be there this year, but she's been there in the past.
Yeah.
Let's see who else. Well, we've got Jeff Snyder. We've got Mike Green. They're kind of more in the macro space. Robert Barnes is going to be there. The lawyer that does work with Viva Frei, does some fantastic work, constitutional lawyer. And he's going to be talking about a lot of the Plan B stuff. In fact, he's representing a lot of people right now in the Pennsylvania Amish community that are fighting the government and trying to gain the right just to sell the stuff that they're producing locally. So it's very important that we support Robert in that effort. Ivor Cummings, who is one of the top leaders in Europe for pushing back against the globalists, the central planners, more specifically the UN, the EU, and the World Economic Forum. He's going to be there as well. And you can get a whole list of speakers and people that we've had in the past at rebelcapitalistlive.com. You can get your tickets. I'd love to see everyone there. If they show up as a result of this show, definitely come up and say hi. And I'd love to talk to you more about prepping.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that'd be great, man. I think it'd be, it's really cool to see these worlds collide. And I think we're just, that in itself is a testament to the fact that times are certainly changing, and to see the world of preparedness and finance come together is probably never a good sign, but it's also a good thing that we can make these connections. So it's been
And
great
it's
having
hugely
you on.
beneficial for the people like your audience that are paying attention.
Hmm.
Because it's when if you did a conference and maybe you can come to mine next year, I could go to yours or something like that, and you integrate these worlds, you're bringing those two networks together of like-minded individuals. Because regardless of what we think about gold or the dollar or anything like that, we all have the same thing in common, and that's that we value freedom, liberty, and free market capitalism. And so, I can introduce people like you to people like Jeff Snyder or Mike Green or Robert Kiyosaki, Kenny McElroy, Joseph Wang. He used to work at the Fed. By the way, he's going to be there. And then you introduce those people to the people in the prepping space. And now all of a sudden we all know each other and we can help each other really open up people's eyes as to what's really happening in the world so they can be ready for whatever volatility we see in 2024, 2025 and beyond.
That's awesome. Yeah, we all hate the government. That's the gist of it, I think.
That's right. That's right.
It's the number one unifying factor. All right. Well, thanks a lot, guys. Go check out his channel. I'll leave links in the description to the Rebel Capitalist as well as your self-titled George Gammon YouTube channel. Thanks for coming by.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
Take care.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.